Imagine trying to meditate while surrounded by chaos. A crowded market, vendors shouting about prices, the metallic clang of carts being dragged over cobblestone, the chatter of children weaving through the crowd. And in the middle of it all, a single monk sitting completely still. His eyes are closed, his posture doesn't waver, his breathing remains slow and deep. This wasn't a test of patience, it was a lesson in mastery. Because to this monk, peace wasn't something you searched for on a mountaintop. It was something you carried inside even when the world screamed around you. That monk's name has been lost to time, but his story has been passed through generations of Zen teachings. He was known not for seclusion, but for immersion. The belief that the mind must find silence within the noise, not by escaping from it. He once said, if you can meditate in a market, you can meditate anywhere. To him, the chaos wasn't an obstacle, it was the training ground. While others sought solitude to quiet their thoughts, he walked straight into the storm, believing that only there could one truly measure the depth of stillness. Every morning, he would set his mat near the center of the market, right between the butcher S stall and the fishmonger S table. The air was thick with the smell of spices, sweat, and smoke. Merchants yelled prices, customers haggled, coins clinked, dogs barked, and bells rang. It was the complete opposite of what most people imagined as a sacred space. Yet he sat, perfectly upright, hands resting lightly on his knees, his breath as even as the tide. At first, the townspeople mocked him. Some tossed bits of rice near him just to see if he'd flinch. Others shouted insults or tried to distract him. But he didn't respond. Hours passed and not once did he open his eyes. The crowd's laughter faded, curiosity took over, and soon silence began to ripple outward, not because the market grew quieter, but because people were drawn into his calm. The monk's stillness became louder than the noise itself. One day, a young man approached him after his meditation and asked, "Master, how can you find silence in such a place?" The monk smiled and replied, "The silence was always here. You just didn't know how to listen." That answer didn't make sense to the man at first, but over time he began to understand. The noise wasn't the enemy. The noise was neutral. It was his reaction to the noise that caused disturbance. That idea forms the heart of Zen philosophy. The belief that suffering, frustration, and distraction are not caused by the world itself, but by our attachment to how we think the world should be. The monk in the market understood this perfectly. He knew that peace found in isolation is fragile because it depends on circumstances staying ideal. But peace found in chaos, that's unshakable, that's real. Think about your own life for a moment. Every day we're surrounded by our own modern version of that market. Notifications lighting up our screens, emails piling in, traffic honking outside, deadlines breathing down our necks. We call it stress. But really, it's just the noise of the world. And like that monk, we have a choice, to fight it or to breathe through it. The monk's approach teaches us that stillness doesn't require silence. It requires attention. When he meditated in the marketplace, he didn't block out the sounds. He absorbed them. The shouting, the hammering, the laughter. They all became part of his meditation. Instead of labeling them as distractions, he treated them as reminders to return to awareness. Each sound was a bell, calling him back to the present. Over time, the practice transformed him. The market didn't get quieter, he did. His pulse slowed, his awareness expanded. He stopped resisting the noise and started noticing the spaces between sounds, the rhythm of footsteps, the brief pauses in conversation, the echo of laughter fading into air. In that rhythm, he found harmony. The chaos became a symphony, and his mind became the conductor. It's easy to think that peace requires distance from the world, that you need to escape to the mountains, shut off your phone, and live in silence. But what this monk proved was that running away from the world doesn't make the mind quiet. It just makes the noise harder to face when it returns. Real peace isn't found in silence. It's built in noise. It's not about avoiding the storm. It's about learning to be still within it. There's a story that one day a student tried to imitate the monk's practice. He sat down near the same market and attempted to meditate, but within minutes he grew irritated.
"It's impossible," he shouted. "The smells, the yelling, the noise. How can anyone find peace here?" The monk, without opening his eyes, said softly, "You think the market is loud, but the noise you hear most clearly is inside you. That's the key. The external chaos only mirrors the internal one." The monk wasn't fighting against the marketplace. He was observing his own mind, reacting to it.
Each distraction became a mirror showing him where his attachments lived, his impatience, his irritation, his craving for control. The practice wasn't about finding peace outside, it was about understanding why peace inside was so easily disturbed. The beauty of his story is how deeply it applies today. Every moment of frustration, every time a coworker interrupts you, a phone buzzes mid-conversation, or traffic traps you on your way home, is another version of that marketplace. And every one of those moments offers a chance to practice. The world isn't testing you, it's training you. If you close your eyes right now and listen, not for silence, but for everything, you'll notice something. Beneath all the sound, there's a deeper layer of awareness that's untouched. That's the same stillness the monk found. It doesn't come from shutting the world out. It comes from noticing that even when everything is loud, something in you remains quiet. That's where peace lives. The monk's lessons spread far beyond his city. Pilgrims came from distant villages just to see the man who meditated in chaos. Some brought gifts, others came with skepticism, but all left with a strange sense of calm. They realized that peace was not a privilege reserved for the isolated or the spiritual elite. It was a skill, something that could be learned, practiced, and mastered, even in the middle of noise, confusion, and life itself. In a world that constantly demands your attention, this story becomes more relevant than ever. We chase silence, thinking it will fix us. But the monk in the market reminds us that silence isn't something you find, it is something you create. It starts with a single breath, a single moment of awareness right where you are. So the next time the world feels too loud, remember him. Remember that the noise isn't the problem, the reaction is. And peace, true, unshakable peace, isn't found by running from the world, but by sitting down in the middle of it and choosing not to run anymore. If this story resonated with you and you want to explore more tales that turn chaos into calm and noise into meaning, make sure to like the video, drop a comment about how you find peace in a noisy world, and subscribe to The Fictionist, where stories become lessons and silence is found not in the mountains, but in the marketplace. That simple shift, back from judging to observing, is where inner silence begins. Because silence, the monk said, isn't the absence of sound, it's the absence of mental resistance to sound. It's when the mind stops fighting what is and allows reality to exist as it is. The monk's greatest lesson wasn't just about sitting still in a noisy place. It was about understanding that the real noise isn't outside. It's inside. The external world only gives the mind something to react to. But the real disturbance, the thing that steals peace, comes from the reaction itself. That's what he meant when he said the sound isn't the problem. The problem is the story the mind tells about it. When a bell rings, it's just vibration in the air. It has no meaning until your mind gives it one. If you're late for work and you hear the bell, you might feel anxious. If it rings during meditation, you might feel irritated. But the sound hasn't changed. Only your interpretation has. The monk wanted his students to see that what disturbs them is not reality itself, but the judgment they attach to it. The sound is neutral. The reaction is personal. He explained it through a simple example. One morning, as he meditated, a cart rumbled past, its wooden wheels screeching on the stones. The noise was harsh, uneven, and sharp. A student nearby grimaced and covered his ears. "Master," he complained, "how can I focus with that terrible sound?" The monk didn't move. He just said quietly, "That sound doesn't disturb you. Your opinion about it does." It's easy to dismiss that idea until you notice how often your own thoughts create noise. Imagine trying to read a book while someone plays music in the background. The first few minutes are fine, but then your mind starts labeling it. It's too loud, it's annoying, I can't concentrate. Suddenly you're not just hearing the sound, you're arguing with it in your head. That argument, that internal dialogue, becomes louder than the music itself. That's the inner noise the monk was talking about. He called it the second sound. The first sound is what enters through the ears, pure and raw. The second sound is what the mind adds on top, and the irritation, the commentary, the resistance. Most people live trapped in that second sound without even realizing it. They think they're disturbed by what's happening outside, but it's really the echo of their own mind that keeps them agitated. To test this, the monk once asked his students to sit in silence and focus on the sound of the market for 1 hour. At first, the students struggled. They noticed everything: the clang of metal, the shouts of sellers, the bleating of goats. Their faces tightened, their shoulders tensed. But then he told them, "Don't call it noise, don't name it, just hear it." Slowly something changed. The same sounds were still there, but the tension began to fade. The noises became rhythm instead of chaos. When the mind stopped labeling, the body stopped resisting. We experience this all the time without realizing it. Think about standing near the ocean. The waves crash loudly, constantly, yet nobody complains that the ocean is too noisy. People describe it as peaceful. Why? Because they don't judge the sound. They accept it as natural. The same principle applies to every sound in life, from a baby crying to traffic blaring. When you stop labeling them as bad or good, they lose their power to disturb you. The monk used to laugh when people said they couldn't to meditate because their environment was too noisy. Then meditate on the noise, he'd say. Don't fight it, study it. He would guide his students to sit and listen carefully, not to block anything out, but to notice every sound as it arose and faded. Through that practice, they learned how much of their suffering came not from the sounds, but from their desire for things to be different. One student once told him, "When I hear the hammering of the blacksmith, I get angry. It ruins my peace." The monk asked, "Does the blacksmith's hammer care about your peace?" The student shook his head. The monk smiled. "Then why give him your power?" The student didn't understand at first, but later he realized the truth. The world will always make noise, but the choice to be disturbed belongs only to you. That's the meaning behind the idea that distraction is an internal source. The mind, by its nature, loves movement. It jumps from thought to thought, constantly searching for stimulation. Even when the world is quiet, the mind keeps talking, planning, remembering, worrying. You can sit in a soundproof room, and still the noise inside will continue. The monk used to say, if you silence the world but not your mind, you've only made a quieter prison. To train his students, he'd have them meditate not in silence, but during busy moments. Children playing, people arguing, animals braying. The goal wasn't endurance, but awareness. He wanted them to see how their thoughts arose automatically. "This is annoying. I wish it would stop. I can't focus." Each of those thoughts was a chance to practice letting go. Instead of following them, they were taught to see them like clouds passing across the sky, appearing, changing, disappearing. Through this, the students began to understand how the mind creates distraction, even without external triggers. One day, when the market was unusually quiet, a student complained that he still couldn't focus. The monk said, "Then now you hear your own thoughts." The student realized that even without noise, his mind was still restless, replaying conversations, imagining problems, chasing plans. Silence outside only made the internal noise more obvious. This is what most people discover when they try to meditate for the first time. The moment everything gets quiet, the mind gets louder. It starts to resist the stillness because it's addicted to motion. That's why peace can't come from silence alone. It must come from understanding the mind's behavior. The monk's wisdom was that you can't control the sounds of the world, but you can understand your reactions to them. That understanding is freedom. He explained it like this. Imagine sitting by a road. Cars pass by, some loud, some soft, some fast. You can't stop the cars, but you don't have to chase them either. You just watch them go. Each sound, each thought is like one of those cars. Let them pass. The noise becomes a background hum, and the observer in you becomes still. In time, the students noticed something strange. The more they stopped resisting sounds, the less they noticed them. The noise of the market became part of the environment, no different than the air they breathed. That's the paradox of awareness. The more you allow, the less it disturbs. This understanding reached beyond meditation. It changed how they lived. When someone insulted them, they no longer reacted with anger. When plans fell apart, they didn't panic. They saw that, just like the market sounds, life's challenges were neutral until the mind added meaning. By removing that second layer of judgment, they removed unnecessary suffering. The monk often said, you cannot stop the birds from flying over your head, but you can stop them from building nests in your hair. In other words, you can't stop thoughts or sounds from appearing, but you can stop them from taking over your peace. That is the practice, not eliminating distraction, but dissolving the mind's need to control it. What begins as noise eventually becomes music when the mind stops arguing with it. The monk's message was never about silencing the world. It was about listening deeply enough to hear what's beneath it. Beneath every sound, every thought, there's an untouched stillness. The task is not to create that stillness, but to remember it's already there. The market, the hammer, the shouting, the silence, they all exist within it. That's how the monk transformed distraction into meditation. By turning attention inward, he proved that peace isn't earned by changing the world, but by understanding yourself. The mind is the true source of distraction, and once you learn to watch it without judgment, even the loudest noise can become a doorway to silence. Listening? Without labeling by it, wasn't it just a clever phrase? It was the monk's most practical lesson, and maybe his most radical one. He told his students that the act of hearing is simple. It's what the mind does after hearing that complicates everything. To truly find silence in chaos, one must learn to listen without adding anything to the experience. That meant no naming, no judging, no deciding whether a sound was pleasant or unpleasant. It meant stripping away the mental commentary that usually follows every moment of perception. He demonstrated this lesson in the middle of a busy morning in the market. The crowd was loud, vendors shouting, animals braying, pots clattering. He sat quietly, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. When one of his students asked how he could possibly meditate in such a storm of noise, he replied, "Because I don't call it noise." That single sentence captured the essence of his teaching. Noise is not a property of sound. It's a label the mind attaches to certain vibrations it doesn't like. To the monk, all sounds were equal, each one a wave moving through air, no better or worse than another. He would say, the universe doesn't divide sound into good or bad, only the human mind does. A bell ringing, a baby crying, a door slamming, they are all the same in nature, just patterns of vibration. The problem starts when we add meaning to them. When a dog barks, the sound itself is harmless, but the mind jumps in with a story. That's annoying, it's ruining my peace. I can't think. It's not the bark that disturbs you, it's the judgment you build around it. The monk called this feeding the noise. Every time you label a sound, you give it energy, you make it real in your mind, and it becomes a disturbance. But if you don't feed it, if you just let it pass, it dies on its own. To help his students grasp this, he created an exercise. Each morning, they were told to sit in the courtyard, close their eyes, and simply listen. Their only task was to notice every sound that reached them. The rustling of leaves, the creak of a wooden door, the cry of a distant bird. The catch was that they weren't allowed to name or describe anything. They couldn't think bird, door, or wind. They could only hear. The moment they caught themselves labeling, they had to stop and return to raw listening. At first, this drove everyone crazy. The mind wants to name things. It's built to categorize, to make sense of the world through language. The silence between the sounds felt uncomfortable, almost unbearable, but after weeks of practice, something began to shift. The students noticed that when they stopped naming sounds, time itself seemed to slow down. The world felt lighter, clearer, and strangely intimate. The line between inside and outside started to blur. They weren't hearing the world anymore, they were the hearing. The monk explained it like this. When you stop labeling the world, you stop separating yourself from it. Every label, pleasant, unpleasant, loud, soft, creates distance. It puts you here and the world there. But when you listen without labeling, there's no separation. The sound arises and disappears within the same awareness that hears it. That awareness doesn't react, it doesn't choose, it simply knows. He gave an example that always stayed with his students. Once, during meditation, a sudden thunderclap shook the entire village. Most of the monks flinched or opened their eyes, startled by the sound. But the master didn't move. When the storm passed, he asked, "Why do you resist what's already over?" They didn't understand. He smiled and said, "The thunder didn't hurt you. Your reaction did. If you had listened without naming it as frightening, it would have come and gone like a passing breeze." That was the heart of the teaching. When you label, you hold on to the experience. When you don't, it moves through you freely. Life becomes lighter because you're no longer carrying every sound, every thought, every emotional reaction like a burden. You become like an open window, letting the world flow in and out without obstruction. The monk often used a metaphor. Imagine standing in a river. The water flows past you. It doesn't stay, but if you scoop it up in your hands, it stops flowing, and soon it becomes muddy. That's what happens when you label things. You stop the flow of experience and turn it into noise. To listen without labeling is to stop scooping, to let life move as it will. One of the monk's senior students once tested this in his own way. He went to meditate beside a construction site, hammering, shouting, dust everywhere. The first hour was torture. He could feel anger bubbling up with every blow of the hammer. But then he remembered his master's words. It's not the sound, it's your label. So he sat there, focusing only on the vibration. He didn't think hammer or construction or noise. He just heard. After a while, something miraculous happened. The sound dissolved into rhythm. It wasn't harsh anymore, it was just energy moving through air. He described it later as if the hammering had turned into a heartbeat. The world hadn't changed, his perception had. That's the quiet power of listening without labeling. It doesn't silence the environment, it silences your resistance to it. It takes what the mind calls noise and transforms it into simple awareness. And that awareness has a quality of stillness that no external condition can touch. The monk also pointed out that this practice extends beyond sound. You can listen without labeling to emotions, to thoughts, even to people. When someone criticizes you, the words themselves are neutral vibrations. It's your labeling, he's attacking me, I'm insulted, I'm right, that turns them into suffering. When you stop labeling, the emotion passes through like sound through air. It doesn't stick, that's real freedom. He once told his students, if you can hear anger as just sound, no one can control your peace again. That's what he meant by mastery, not the power to silence the world, but the power to hear it without distortion. Over time, this practice changes the way you live. You start to see how much of life's stress comes from mental commentary. You spill tea on your shirt, and before the stain even dries, your mind shouts, I'm clumsy, this day is ruined. You're not reacting to the tea, you're reacting to your own thoughts about it. The monk's training teaches you to skip that step. Just see the tea, just feel the warmth, let it be what it is. When the students finally understood this, they began to smile more. The same market that once felt chaotic became alive and harmonious. The world didn't get quieter, their minds did. They were no longer fighting against reality, they were flowing with it. The monk's final instruction summed it all up. When you hear a sound, don't say it's loud or soft, good or bad. Don't even say it's a sound, just hear. And in that moment, you will hear not only the world, but yourself. That was the essence of listening without labeling. A bell was no longer a bell. A barking dog was no longer a disturbance. Every vibration became part of the same vast silence, the silence that was never broken, only hidden beneath the noise we create with our judgments. And when his students learned to listen that way, they didn't just find peace, they discovered that the peace had been there all along, waiting beneath the labels they'd spent their whole lives repeating. The monk's teaching about silence shattered the common idea that quiet means an absence of sound. To him, silence was something much deeper and infinitely more portable. He said, you don't need to turn the world down to hear the silence. You need to stop turning yourself up. Silence wasn't about muting life, it was about no longer fighting with it. It was the stillness that appeared when awareness became so open, so non-reactive, that even the chaos around you could flow through without leaving a mark. In the crowded market where he trained daily, the monk would sit cross-legged among the shouting merchants and the constant clatter of carts. To any observer, it looked impossible. The air vibrated with movement, laughter, and arguments, yet his face remained calm, breathing slow, body unmoved. One day, a young student asked him, Master, how can you meditate when the world is this loud? The monk smiled and replied, It's only loud if you believe the sound is outside you. What he meant was that noise and silence were not environmental conditions, they were states of perception. The moment the mind stopped drawing a line between itself and what it heard, the noise lost its power. He explained this idea through a simple image. Think of the mind as a lake, he said. When the surface is disturbed, every ripple reflects the world in fragments. You see broken shapes, distorted light, incomplete images, but when the water is still, the reflection is perfect. Stillness doesn't erase the world, it reveals it. In the same way, when the mind is calm and open, sound becomes part of the reflection, not a disturbance. The market's chaos didn't vanish, but to him, it was simply movement within a vast, quiet awareness. He called this state complete awareness. It wasn't a trance or escape. It was being fully awake, hearing everything but clinging to nothing. He used to tell his students, "You don't go inside to find silence. You expand so wide that the whole world fits inside you. When the mind stops reacting, sounds stop being intruders. They become part of the total experience. A donkey braying, a merchant shouting, a bell ringing, all these merge into one seamless wave of perception. Nothing interrupts the silence because the silence is the field in which everything happens." One morning, while meditating in the market square, a cart tipped over right beside him. Wooden crates smashed, glass shattered, and the startled horse neighed wildly. The students jumped up, covering their ears, but the monk didn't flinch. When they later asked if he even noticed the noise, he said, "I noticed it completely. That's why it didn't disturb me." That was the paradox of his practice. The more completely you let sound in, the less it can hurt you. Resistance, not sound, creates suffering. To help his students understand, he gave them an exercise. He told them to close their eyes and imagine sitting in a thunderstorm. The goal wasn't to escape the thunder, but to listen to it so deeply that it lost its edge. He said, "Don't try to block it out. Let the thunder crash through you. Feel the air tremble. Let the vibration pass into your bones. Don't say it's loud. Don't say it's frightening. Just be the hearing." When they practiced this long enough, they realized something strange. The thunder wasn't attacking them, it was simply happening. The fear dissolved, and with it, the feeling of being separate from the sound. That realization opened a doorway. Silence was no longer something they had to find, it was something they could carry. The monk often said, "Stillness isn't a place, it's a posture." You could be sitting in traffic, walking through a storm, or standing in a noisy crowd, and the same peace could unfold inside you if you stopped dividing the world into quiet and loud. In complete awareness, sound was not an obstacle to peace. It was proof that peace was already there. He described silence as the ocean beneath the waves. Most people, he said, live among the waves, reacting to every crash and splash. But the ocean doesn't fight the waves, it is the waves. Silence, in that sense, isn't the opposite of sound. It's the awareness that holds it. When you recognize that, every sound becomes a note in a larger symphony. You don't need the world to be quiet because you understand that silence was never broken to begin with. The monk students tested this truth outside the monastery. One of them worked at a nearby harbor surrounded by sailors, merchants, and shouting dock workers. It was one of the loudest places in the city. Yet he began practicing his master's lesson each day, focusing on the awareness that held all sound instead of judging the sounds themselves. Within weeks, he noticed that the same dock that once felt unbearable now felt alive, rhythmic, almost musical. He could hear everything: the creak of wood, the splash of water, the chatter of men. But instead of chaos, he heard harmony. The noise hadn't changed. His relationship to it had. The monk explained it through another metaphor. "You think silence is fragile, like glass," he said. "But it's not. It's more like space. You can fill it with sound, but you can't destroy it. Space doesn't resist what it contains, and silence doesn't resist what it hears. When awareness becomes that spacious, it stops trying to control the world. It doesn't need to. The mind stops grasping at calm because it realizes that calm was never gone. It was only buried beneath the fight." He told his students, "You cannot lose silence. You can only forget to notice it. Every time the mind labels something as noise, it forgets the stillness that's listening. But if you bring your attention back, not to the sound, but to the hearing itself, you touch that silence again." That's what he meant by portable stillness. You don't carry it like an object. You carry it as understanding. There was a moment near the end of his life when this truth became most evident. During a public ceremony, thousands gathered, and the crowd was almost deafening. People shouted blessings, drums thundered, Children cried. Yet the monk walked calmly to the center, sat down, and began to meditate. The crowd gradually fell silent, not because he asked them to, but because something about his stillness spread outward. Later, someone asked what he had been doing during that moment. He answered, "Nothing. I was just listening." That was the essence of his teaching. Silence isn't created by controlling the world. It's revealed when you stop controlling your mind. Complete awareness doesn't demand peace from the outside. It discovers peace inside, no matter the conditions. To live that way is to carry a kind of freedom that no noise can touch. The monk's students realized that silence wasn't an event, it was a relationship. When the mind stopped fighting reality, everything it heard became part of the same vast, quiet awareness. The clatter of a market, the crash of thunder, even the rhythm of one's own heartbeat, all of it flowed within the same unbroken stillness. And that stillness, once seen clearly, never left them again. It traveled wherever they went, as invisible and indestructible as the air itself. In the monk's final teaching, he explained that peace was never about controlling the environment. It was about mastering the space between stimulus and response. Every moment of life offers a choice to react or to remain still. When noise erupts, when criticism hits, when life throws uncertainty into your path, your mind's first instinct is to fight, to defend, to label, to create stories about why things shouldn't be the way they are. That very resistance is what fuels suffering. The monk used to say, noise has no power over you until you decide it does. Imagine standing in a crowded train station at rush hour. The announcements echo, people bump into you, and phones buzz constantly. Most would feel their anxiety rising, but now imagine someone standing calmly in the same place, eyes closed, breathing evenly, unmoved by the same chaos. The sound hasn't changed. The only thing that changed was the internal reaction. That stillness is not passivity. It's power. It's the ability to decide what deserves your energy and what doesn't. This is where the monk's true lesson reveals itself. Peace isn't something that life grants you when things are perfect. It's something you build within yourself by not surrendering your emotional stability to the world's noise. You learn to respond, not react. You train yourself to let the first wave of irritation, anger, or anxiety pass without grabbing hold of it. That single pause, the moment you choose awareness over reaction, is the moment you take back control. He often described this with a simple image. Picture a pond. When you throw a stone into it, ripples spread. If the pond is turbulent already, those ripples blend into chaos, but if the pond is still, each ripple is visible, distinct, and fades naturally. Your mind is that pond. The world will throw stones, loud people, stressful situations, unexpected problems. But if your inner waters remain calm, every disturbance fades quickly. That calmness comes from discipline, from choosing again and again not to let the external world dictate your internal state. In modern life, it's easy to think peace comes from quiet retreats or from cutting yourself off from the world. But that's not peace, that's escape. The monk believed true mastery is being able to sit at the center of noise and remain centered. He trained himself to meditate not in temples or mountaintops, but beside blacksmiths hammering metal and children shouting in play. He wanted to test his mind against the full weight of the world's noise, because he knew that silence achieved in comfort vanishes in discomfort. The real test of peace is whether you can hold it when everything around you demands you lose it. Consider how this lesson plays out today. You wake up, and before you even get out of bed, your phone is flashing with notifications. Emails, messages, breaking news, all begging for your reaction. The modern mind is conditioned to respond instantly, to jump from one disturbance to another without pause. Every ping is a stone in your pond. But what if, instead of reacting immediately, you practiced the monk's silence? You notice the sound, you acknowledge it, and then you decide how, or if, you should respond. That's where freedom begins. This choice, repeated over time, reshapes your entire life. The monk's students said that after years of practice, even the loudest marketplace began to sound like music to him. Not because the noise had changed, but because his relationship with it had. He had stripped sound of meaning, emotion, and judgment until it became just vibration, no longer friend or enemy, no longer distraction or focus, simply experience. That's what real silence is, the mind no longer interpreting, no longer resisting, no longer chasing quiet, because it has found peace in simply being aware. When you stop reacting to the world, you gain something incredible, clarity. You start to see how often you give away your peace to things that don't deserve it. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and suddenly your entire mood is ruined. A co-worker's tone irritates you, and you replay it in your head for hours. Every moment of reaction is a moment you surrender your freedom. The monk would say, every time you react, you hand over your peace like a coin to a beggar. But if you hold your coin, if you don't spend it on every noise, every insult, every inconvenience, you remain rich in calmness. That's why he taught that your greatest power is not in changing the world, but in choosing your response to it. He reminded his students that the world will always be noisy, messy, unpredictable. Trying to make it otherwise is like trying to stop the wind, but the wind only disturbs what is light, leaves, dust, unanchored things. When you are grounded, when your awareness is deep and steady, the wind can blow, the world can shout, but you remain unshaken. Over time, this practice of non-reaction transforms into something greater than peace. It becomes wisdom. You begin to see that every sound, every disturbance, every person testing your patience is not an obstacle but an opportunity. Each challenge is a reminder to strengthen your awareness, to reinforce your stillness, to deepen your mastery of response. Chaos stops being something to avoid and becomes your teacher. That's the essence of what the monk meant when he said, "Silence is portable." You carry it with you no matter where you go. So when life grows loud, when your thoughts race, when the world feels like too much, remember this final lesson. You don't need the world to be quiet. You only need to be undisturbed within it. The noise around you is not the enemy. Your reaction to it is. Once you stop feeding that reaction, the noise loses its power. You will see that peace was never something to find. It was something to uncover beneath all the unnecessary reactions. And that perhaps is the truest form of power. Not the power to control others or silence the world, but the quiet authority of mastering yourself. If this story made you reflect, take a moment to breathe, to be aware of the sounds around you, and notice how they pass through you when you don't resist them. That's where peace begins. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind you that the extraordinary is hidden in the ordinary, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to The Fictionist. Your journey toward inner stillness has only just begun.